Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Alice, Borderlands of Desire. The world had become a pale, soundless thing. For Alice, the days bled into one another, a monochrome tapestry of quiet desperation. It had been 6 months since the end of things, since the phone call that silenced the music, since the future she had meticulously planned crumbled to dust in her hands. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of curated art books and thriving plants, now felt like a beautifully appointed tomb. She moved through it like a ghost, the silence so profound she could hear the dust motes settling on the forgotten surfaces of her life. It was on an evening of particular stillness, as a slow, gray rain streaked the windows, that the unraveling began. She stood before her full-length mirror, a relic of a more ornate time, its silvering beginning to fleck at the edges. Her reflection was a stranger, a woman with eyes that held the ghost of a laugh, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. She wore a simple silk chemise, the color of cream, and it felt like a lie against her skin. She was performing normality, a hollow pantomime for an audience of one. And then, she saw it. A flicker of movement, deep within the mirror's depths. Not her own reflection, but something else. A shape, swift and impossibly white, darting through the darkness behind her image. She spun around, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. The room was empty, of course. Just the same muted tones, the same oppressive quiet. She turned back to the mirror, her breath catching. The glass was no longer reflecting her room. It showed a long, dark corridor, lined with velvet the color of a deep, arterial wine. At the far end, a figure paused and turned. It was a man, or the impression of one, clad in a suit of pristine white that seemed to generate its own light. His waistcoat was embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like a captured nebula. His eyes, from this distance, were 2 points of piercing, anxious silver. He pulled a watch from his pocket, a delicate thing of platinum and moonstone, and frowned at it with an air of profound urgency. Then he looked directly at her. His gaze was not a gentle invitation. It was a hook, set deep in her soul, and with a sudden, terrifying lurch, she felt it pull. A whisper, not in her ears but in her mind, coiled like smoke. "You're late." The words were a key turning in a lock she didn't know she possessed. A fracture appeared in the center of the mirror, a spiderweb of light. The world behind the glass swelled, the scent of old roses, damp earth, and something electric, like ozone after a storm, flooding her senses. The solidity of the floor vanished. There was no tumble, no fall down a rabbit hole, but a yielding. The mirror became a gateway of liquid mercury, and she was drawn through it, the silk of her chemise whispering against the threshold between worlds. The sensation was not of falling, but of sinking. Sinking into a substance that was neither water nor air, but something like conscious shadow. It was cool and soft against her skin, a velvet embrace that stripped away the weight of her grief without erasing its memory. Time stretched and snapped, lost all meaning. She saw flashes of impossible geography, a forest of giant, glowing mushrooms whose gills pulsed with a soft, internal bioluminescence, a river of what looked like liquid starlight, flowing silently upwards, a chandelier made of frozen tears, catching a light from no discernible source. She landed, if it could be called landing, on a bed of moss so deep and soft it felt like 1,000 feather mattresses. The air was warm and heavy, perfumed with the same intoxicating blend of roses and ozone. She pushed herself up, her fingers sinking into the velvety green. She was in a garden, but a garden dreamed by a fevered god. The flowers were enormous, their petals the texture of bruised silk, and they whispered to each other in sibilant tones as she passed. The colors were too vivid, the scents too potent. It was a world of heightened sensation, a direct assault on the numbness that had encased her. Ahead, through a grove of trees with silver bark and leaves of beaten gold, she saw a glimmer of white. The white rabbit. He stood at the mouth of a path that twisted away into a darker part of the wood, his gloved hand resting on the trunk of a tree. He was taller than she'd imagined, his form lean and elegant. The anxiety she had seen in his eyes was still there, a live wire humming beneath a polished surface, but it was mingled with something else now, a profound, captivating intensity. "You lingered," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. It was the same voice that had whispered in her mind. "One should never linger at the threshold. It is the most dangerous place of all." "Where am I?" Alice asked, her own voice sounding small and rough in this place of whispering flowers and resonant silence. "You are in the Borderlands," he replied, his silver eyes tracing the lines of her body, the fall of her hair, as if memorizing her. "The land between what was and what may be. The landscape of your own unspoken longings." He took a step closer, and the air between them seemed to thicken. "I am your guide, if you wish it. Or your undoing, if you prefer. The choice, as ever, is an illusion. You were already coming this way." He offered her his hand. He wore gloves of the finest white kid leather. She hesitated, the habits of her old world, caution, rationality, fear, screaming their warnings. But those warnings were echoes from a distant shore. Here, the only truth was the frantic beating of her own heart, the pull in her core towards this mysterious, urgent man, and the terrifying, thrilling sense that for the first time in months, she was truly feeling something. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, his touch through the glove sending a jolt of something warm and potent up her arm. "My name," she began. "Is known," he interrupted, his lips curving in a smile that was both cruel and kind. "Here, you are only what you are in this moment. And in this moment, you are desire. Come. We have an appointment." He led her down the winding path, deeper into the heart of Wonderland. The trees leaned in, their leaves brushing against her shoulders like curious fingers. The white rabbit's presence was a magnet, drawing her forward into the unknown. He was the embodiment of the tension she felt within herself, the desperate need for control warring with a deeper, more primal need to surrender. To let go. To fall. And as they walked, Alice realized the fall had only just begun. She had not fallen into Wonderland. She had fallen as Wonderland, and it was now rising up to meet her, a world built from the shadows and the light of her own soul. The journey into the borderlands of her desire had truly begun. The path unspooled before them like a ribbon of dark silk, and the white rabbit, her rabbit, led her with an unnerving certainty. His hand on hers was no longer a simple point of contact, it was a conduit. A low, thrumming energy passed from his gloved fingers into her blood, a silent conversation of pulse and potential. The garden around them grew more sentient, more vocal, with every step. The flowers were the most disconcerting. Towering lilies with petals like veined marble turned their chalices towards her, their powdery scent thickening into words. "Lost, she is lost," whispered a lily, its voice a dusty exhalation. "No, found, she is finally found," countered a peony, its 100 blushing petals rustling like ball gowns. "Look at the way he holds her. The rabbit has chosen a new guest." "But is she ready for the tasting?" murmured a hydrangea, its clustered blooms shifting from blue to a suspicious, bruised purple. "Her edges are so sharp. She is all broken pieces." "Ignore them," the rabbit said, his voice a low counter-melody to the floral chatter. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. "They are the gossip guard, the chorus of your own insecurities given voice and vine. They know only what you fear they know." Alice tightened her grip on his hand, a reflexive gesture. "And what do you know?" This time, he did glance down at her, a sliver of silver from the corner of his eye. "I know the taste of time. And I know you are wasting yours with questions that have no answers." He led her out of the grove and into a clearing dominated by a single, colossal rose bush. It was a tangled, sprawling architecture of thorns and blossoms, each rose a perfect, velvety black, so deep they seemed to drink the light from the air. In the center of the bush was an archway, woven from the densest part of the stems. "The gate of yearning," the rabbit announced, releasing her hand. The absence of his touch was immediate and cold. "It will not open for me. It answers only to a certain quality of want." Alice stared at the impenetrable wall of thorns. "What must I do?" "Want," he said simply, stepping back into the shadows of a weeping willow, its leaves like strands of liquid jet. "Not with your mind. Not with a list of pros and cons. Want with your blood. Want with your breath. Want something you have forbidden yourself to want." She stood before the dark roses, feeling foolish. The floral whispers from the garden seemed to gather at her back, a silent, judging audience. She thought of her old life, of the careful spreadsheets, the planned career trajectory, the sensible, kind-faced man she was supposed to marry. It all felt like a story about someone else. What did she want? She wanted the numbness to end. She wanted to feel real again. Too vague, a voice inside her hissed, a voice that sounded suspiciously like her own. "The gate requires a specific key." She closed her eyes, shutting out the impossible garden. She reached into the quiet, wounded places within. What did she want? Not what she should want. Not what would be acceptable. An image flashed behind her eyelids, the rabbit's hand, the fine kid leather soft against her skin. She remembered the jolt of his touch, the way his anxiety called to a matching tension in her own body. She wanted to unravel that tension. She wanted to feel his bare hands on her skin. She wanted to trace the line of his jaw, to discover if his skin was as cool as his demeanor suggested. She wanted to still the frantic ticking of his watch with her own lips. The desire was sudden, sharp, and shockingly specific. It was a physical ache, a hollowing out in her belly and a heat that spread through her limbs, making them feel heavy and liquid. A soft, collective gasp rustled through the gossip guard. Alice opened her eyes. The thorny stems were not parting. They were unthreading. The vicious points were softening, curling back on themselves like the fronds of a fern unfurling in spring. The black roses turned their faces away, their petals blushing a deep, impossible crimson at the very tips. The archway was clear, revealing a path of white sand that glittered as if mixed with diamond dust. The rabbit emerged from the shadows. He did not smile, but his intense silver gaze was upon her, and it was no longer just anxious. It was appreciative. Hungry. "Ah," he said, the single syllable rich with understanding. "So, it is that kind of journey." He offered his arm now, a more formal, more intimate gesture. She took it, her fingers resting on the pristine white wool of his sleeve. As they passed through the gate, the roses leaned in, and one particularly bold blossom brushed its velvety petal against her cheek. It was warm, like human skin. "The Hatter will be pleased," the rose whispered, its scent now overwhelmingly seductive, like aged wine and dark chocolate. "He does so love a guest with a palate for complexity." Beyond the gate, the world changed again. The lush, chaotic garden gave way to a landscape of severe and stunning geometry. Hedges, clipped into perfect, labyrinthine walls, rose 20 feet on either side of the white sand path. The sky above was a perpetual twilight, a deep indigo streaked with violet and the first silver pinpricks of stars. "Where are we going now?" Alice asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "To the heart of the labyrinth," the rabbit replied, his pace slowing to a more contemplative stroll. "To a place where time is not passed, but savored. We are going to tea." "Tea?" "The Hatter is the master of ceremonies. His tea is not a beverage. It is an experience. A ritual of unmasking." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "He will offer you a role to play. A self to try on. You would be wise to choose carefully. The self you select at his table has a way of sticking." The path twisted and turned, the high hedges creating a disorienting silence, broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps on the sand. Alice felt the weight of the rabbit's words. This was not a casual invitation. It was a test. A negotiation of identity. After what felt like both an eternity and a single breath, the labyrinth opened into a circular clearing. In its center stood a single, massive table carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface polished to a mirror shine. It was set with an absurdly large number of chairs, no two alike, a gilded throne, a stool of twisted driftwood, a sleek modern chair of chrome and leather. And at the head of the table, presiding over the chaotic assortment, was a man. He was not sitting. He was perched on the edge of the obsidian table, one leg swinging idly. He wore a tailcoat of a deep, iridescent bottle green, and his waistcoat was a riot of embroidered clock faces, all showing different, impossible times. His hair was a wild, artful tumble of chestnut curls, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were the color of rich, steeped tea, and they held a glint of pure, unadulterated madness. At last, he declared, his voice a warm, melodic baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air. He sprang to his feet with an actor's grace and swept a dramatic bow. "The guest of honor. And you brought the rabbit. How punctual." He said the last word as if it were a mildly distasteful joke. This was the Mad Hatter. And as his gaze swept over Alice, from her bare feet to her disheveled hair, she felt not judged, but seen. It was as if he were looking past the woman she appeared to be, past the woman she had been, and was reading the potential of the woman she might become, all the wild and forgotten versions of herself waiting in the wings. The Hatter smiled, a wide, captivating, and utterly dangerous smile. "My dear," he said, stepping forward and taking her hand from the rabbit's arm. His touch was bare, his fingers long and surprisingly calloused. They were warm. "You look absolutely parched. Come. Let's find out what you really taste like." The Hatter's hand was nothing like the rabbit's. Where the rabbit's gloved touch was a promise of cool, controlled intensity, the Hatter's bare skin was a live wire of immediate, chaotic energy. He did not so much lead her to the table as he orchestrated her arrival, his movements a fluid dance around her stillness. "Rabbit, you may take the hourglass chair," the Hatter declared, flicking his wrist towards a seat carved from pale, translucent stone through which a slow trickle of black sand descended. "It suits your preoccupations." The rabbit's lips tightened almost imperceptibly, but he inclined his head and took the designated seat, his posture rigid. He became a statue of white in the shifting gloom, his silver eyes fixed on Alice, a silent sentinel at the edges of the ritual. "And for you, our lovely descent," the Hatter mused, circling Alice, his gaze a tangible pressure on her skin. He stopped behind her, his voice a whisper close to her ear that sent a shiver down her spine. "So many choices. The throne of vanity? Too brittle. The stool of humility? Too plain. You are neither, are you? You are something, in between." He moved again, a sudden flash of green, and pulled out a chair from the shadows. It was a low, deep armchair upholstered in a fabric that shifted color in the light, from a deep plum to a blood red. It looked less like a piece of furniture and more like an embrace. "The settee of introspection," he announced with a flourish. "For the one who is willing to sink into the depths of herself. Will you sit?" It felt less like a question and more like a challenge. Alice met his tea-colored eyes, seeing the mad glint within them, and felt an answering spark within her own chest. A defiance she thought had died months ago. She nodded and let him guide her into the chair. It was as soft and enveloping as it looked, holding her in a way that was both comforting and inescapable. The Hatter clapped his hands once, a sharp sound that echoed in the clearing. "The ceremony begins. First, we must choose our roles. For every tea, a theme. For every guest, a mask." He leaned on the table, his face level with hers. "Today's theme is the unspoken. We shall pour not just tea, but the truths we keep in the quietest chambers of our hearts." He produced a porcelain teapot from beneath the table. It was a beautiful, fragile thing, painted with coiling dragons and phoenixes. He set it down, but made no move to pour. Instead, he looked from Alice to the rabbit and back again. "Our roles," he prompted. "Rabbit, you are ever the keeper of time. You may play the reluctant guardian. Your duty is to watch, to warn, and to yearn for an order that will never come." The rabbit's jaw tightened, but he gave another curt nod, his gaze never leaving Alice. "And you, my dear descent," the Hatter said, his voice softening into an intimate caress. "What role will you play? The innocent victim? Too late for that, I think. The avenging angel? The anger is there, buried deep, but it is not your primary flavor." He reached out and, with a startling gentleness, traced the line of her collarbone through the thin silk of her chemise. The touch was electric, a brand of pure sensation. "No. I see it. You shall be the queen of unmade decisions. The ruler of all the paths not taken. It is a throne of immense power, and immense sorrow. Will you accept this crown?" Alice felt the title settle over her like a mantle. It was terrifyingly accurate. Her life had been a series of safe, sensible choices, until the universe had ripped the script away. Now, she was adrift in a sea of unmade decisions, each one a possible future self. She saw them then, flickering at the edges of her vision, phantoms of the woman who had taken the other job, moved to the other city, said yes to the other man. They were all her, and none of them were. "Yes," she breathed, the word a surrender and a claim all at once. "Excellent." The Hatter beamed. He finally lifted the teapot. "Now, for the tea itself. What is your desire?" "We have infusion of forgotten promises, a delicate, melancholic blend. There is brew of reckless courage, which is smoky and potent. Or," he paused, his eyes locking with hers, "there is tincture of sublime surrender. A rare vintage. It does not intoxicate, it clarifies. It strips away the fear of feeling itself. But I must warn you, it is not for the timid." The rabbit stirred in his hourglass chair. "Hatter," he said, his voice a low warning. "That is a potent brew for a first tasting." "Oh, hush, you chronologically obsessed fuddy-duddy," the Hatter chided without looking away from Alice. "Our queen has been timid her whole life. Look at her. She is starving for a flavor that is truly hers." "Well?" he asked Alice. "What is your pleasure?" The metaphors were thick, the danger palpable. She knew the tea was not really tea. It was a choice about how far she was willing to go, how much of herself she was willing to unmask. The tincture of sublime surrender called to the part of her that had ached at the rabbit's touch, that had thrilled at the Hatter's madness. It called to the desire to stop thinking, stop analyzing, and simply be. "The surrender," Alice said, her voice clear and firm in the twilight air. The Hatter's smile was a thing of breathtaking beauty and terror. "A monarch's choice." He poured the liquid into a cup of impossibly thin, crimson glass. It was not brown, but a deep, shimmering gold, and the scent that rose from it was of sun-warmed skin, night-blooming jasmine, and a hint of something dark and spicy, like cardamom and sin. He handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed, and a fresh wave of heat cascaded through her. "Drink," he whispered, his voice a hypnotic command. "And know your own heart." She brought the cup to her lips. The liquid was warm, not hot. She took a sip. It was not a taste, it was an experience. It flowed over her tongue and down her throat, and as it did, a wave of pure, unadulterated sensation followed in its wake. The silken chemise she wore suddenly felt like a prison of threads. Every whisper of the fabric against her skin was amplified 100-fold, a maddening, exquisite friction. She was acutely aware of the weight of her own body in the chair, the pulse of blood in her veins, the slow, deep draw of breath into her lungs. She looked at the rabbit. The careful, controlled mask of his features seemed to soften at the edges. She could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the quick, almost imperceptible rhythm of his breathing. She could feel his watchful gaze on her skin like a physical touch, a cool, silver trail over her arms, her throat. The air between them, once merely tense, now hummed with a palpable magnetic charge. It was the tension of a bowstring drawn to its limit, and she was the arrow. Then she looked at the Hatter. His madness was no longer a performance, it was a raw, vibrating energy field. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the deep, unsettling knowledge of rituals and desires. He watched her with the focus of a connoisseur observing a masterpiece come to life. He was not just seeing her, he was reveling in her awakening. "The first truth," the Hatter murmured, his voice seeming to come from inside her own mind. "What is it you see, my queen?" Alice's gaze drifted between the two men, the cool, anxious moon and the warm, chaotic sun. The tincture of sublime surrender stripped away her inhibitions, her fears, her grief. What was left was a core of pure, shocking want. "I see," she began, her voice a husky version of its former self. "I see a key and a lock. And I cannot tell which is which." A slow, genuine smile spread across the Hatter's face. He looked at the rabbit, whose silver eyes had widened slightly, a crack in his impeccable composure. "The ceremony is a success," the Hatter said softly. "The Queen has begun to speak her truth." Alice leaned back in the settee of introspection, the crimson cup cradled in her hands. The labyrinth, the twilight, the two impossible men, they were no longer a frightening dream. They were the most real thing she had ever known. She had crossed a border within herself, and there was no going back. The effects of the tincture did not fade so much as they settled, seeping into her bones like a permanent, low-grade fever of awareness. The obsidian table, the Hatter's manic grin, the rabbit's tense silence, it all remained, but viewed through a lens of heightened, almost painful clarity. Every detail was razor-sharp, every sensation a note in a complex symphony. "The tea is drunk, the roles are played," the rabbit said, his voice cutting through the thick, perfumed air. He stood, the hourglass chair seeming to release him reluctantly. "The ceremony is concluded. Alice comes with me." The use of her name, her real name, was a shock. It felt like an anchor thrown into the stormy sea of her awakening, a tug back towards a shore she no longer recognized. The Hatter pouted, a theatrical, exaggerated expression. "So soon? But the Queen and I were just getting to the heart of the matter. The space between a key and a lock is the most interesting territory in all of Wonderland." He winked at Alice, a flash of conspiratorial madness. "It's where all the delicious friction lives." "Her journey is not yours to cure it," the rabbit replied, his tone flat and final. He walked to Alice's side and offered his hand. It was a command, not a request. Still thrumming with the tincture's power, Alice looked from his gloved hand to his face. The anxiety was back, paramount in his silver eyes, but beneath it was a possessiveness that sent a fresh, hot thrill through her. He was the reluctant guardian, indeed, drawn to her transformation even as he seemed compelled to control it. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to pull her to her feet. The world tilted for a moment, the sensations of the settee's embrace, the Hatter's gaze, and the rabbit's grip colliding in a dizzying vortex. "Until our paths cross again, my queen," the Hatter called, blowing her a kiss from the tips of his fingers. "Remember, a crown is not for wearing." It is for tilting, at a jaunty, dangerous angle. Then the rabbit was leading her away, not back through the labyrinth, but through a gap in the hedge she hadn't noticed, a narrow passage that seemed to have opened just for them. The moment they were through, the hedges snapped shut behind them, silencing the Hatter's world completely. They were in a forest of giant, fossilized mushrooms. The caps soared overhead like the domes of forgotten cathedrals, their surfaces a mosaic of intricate, mineralized patterns that glowed with a soft, phosphorescent light. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the whisper of their footsteps on a carpet of luminous moss. The rabbit walked quickly, his grip on her hand firm. He said nothing, his jaw set. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing between them. "You're angry," Alice said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, fungal space. "Anger is a pointless emotion," he replied, not looking at her. "It is a spasm of the ego, a disruption in the flow of time. I am concerned. The Hatter's rituals are not games. They are psychological scalpels. He cares not for the patient's recovery, only for the beauty of the incision." "He helped me feel something," Alice countered, the defiance from the tea ceremony still burning within her. "Something other than hollow. Or is that not part of the journey you have so meticulously planned for me?" He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. In the eerie glow of the mushrooms, his white suit seemed to luminesce, and his eyes were like shards of mercury. "Do not confuse sensation with transformation. The Hatter deals in the former. I am guiding you towards the latter. There is a difference between being stripped bare and being reborn." "And you are the arbiter of that difference?" she challenged, stepping closer. The tincture made her bold. It made her aware of the scant inches between their bodies, of the quickened rhythm of his breath. "The keeper of time and the judge of journeys?" His gaze dropped to her lips. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might kiss her, that the relentless tension between them would finally snap. But he did not. He simply raised a gloved hand and, with a feather-light touch, traced the line of her jaw. The kid leather was impossibly soft, a ghost of a caress that screamed of the skin beneath. "I am your guide," he whispered, his voice husky. "And my only desire is to see you whole. But the path to wholeness is through the self, not through the Hatter's hall of mirrors." A slow, familiar voice purred from the shadows above them. "But aren't the two so often the same thing?" They both looked up. On the cap of a giant mushroom directly overhead, a smile had appeared. A wide, languid, impossibly crimson smile, hovering in the air, disconnected from any visible body. It was a grin of pure, unadulterated amusement. "Cat," the rabbit said, his voice laced with a fresh layer of irritation. He withdrew his hand from Alice's face, the moment broken. The grin widened. "Rabbit. Always hurting, always hurrying. Does the clock in your chest ever let you rest?" The voice was smooth as cream, deep and knowing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Show yourself," Alice said, feeling neither fear nor surprise, only a deep, resonant curiosity. This felt inevitable. "Oh, but I am," the voice purred. The grin persisted, but now, around it, the air began to shimmer. It was like watching a creature emerge from deep water, only the water was the very fabric of reality. First, the faint outline of a sleek, powerful head formed around the smile, then two luminous, yellow-green eyes materialized above it. Then, with a final, silent ripple, the rest of the body appeared, a large, sleek creature with fur the color of twilight smoke, lounging indolently on the mushroom cap. This was the Cheshire Cat. "You see," the cat said, examining a paw, "the question is not whether I am here or not. The question is, are you? Or are you, like most people, mostly a memory of yourself, trailing a few steps behind?" His luminous eyes fixed on Alice. "You, for instance. The woman who fell through the mirror, she is already a ghost. The woman who drank the Hatter's tea, she is a lovely, fleeting fever. So, which one is here with us now? The queen of unmade decisions? Or someone else entirely?" His words were riddles, but they struck with the force of truth. The tincture's clarity made her see the precision in his ambiguity. She was all of those women, and none of them. "I am the one who is listening to you," Alice replied, finding a core of steel within the whirlpool of her identities. The cat's grin became, if possible, even more pronounced. A low, rumbling chuckle vibrated through the mushroom stem. "Oh, very good. An excellent non-answer. It leaves all the doors open." He shifted his gaze to the rabbit. "She's learning faster than you anticipated, isn't she? It bothers you. You prefer a predictable itinerary." "What do you want, cat?" the rabbit asked, his patience clearly at an end. "Want?" The cat seemed to consider this, his tail twitching. "I want to see which path she takes when she comes to the fork." "What fork?" Alice asked. The cat ignored her, his eyes on the rabbit. "The path of the heart," he said, his voice dropping to a suggestive purr, "leads to the palace of crystallized longing. A beautiful, sterile place. All order and forever. Very safe." His gaze slid back to Alice, the yellow-green eyes gleaming. "And the path of the body leads to the carnival of flesh. A wild, transient place. All sensation and surrender. Very real." The rabbit was silent, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "He won't tell you," the cat whispered directly into Alice's mind, the sound a silken thread winding around her thoughts. "He wants to guide you to the palace. To preserve you, like a perfect specimen under glass. He is afraid of what will happen if you truly taste the carnival. He is afraid you will not need his guidance anymore. He is afraid you will not need him." The cat began to fade, starting with the tip of his tail. "The choice, of course, is yours. But remember, my dear," he said, his body dissolving into shimmering motes of light, leaving only his wide, knowing grin hanging in the air. "You can't have a caterpillar become a butterfly without the messy, squirming, transformative process in between. Sometimes, to find your heart, you must first lose your head." And with a final, silent flicker, the grin vanished too. Alice was left alone with the rabbit in the glowing forest, the cat's words hanging in the air between them, a challenge and a promise. The two paths lay ahead, invisible but felt, and for the first time, she understood that the most important borderland was not around her, but within. The border between the safety of a preserved heart and the terrifying freedom of a body fully felt. The silence left by the cat's grin was heavier than any sound. It was filled with the unspoken implications of his words, with the rabbit's rigid disapproval, and with the roaring of Alice's own blood in her ears. The carnival of flesh. The name itself was a touch, a whisper against the most secret parts of her mind. The rabbit finally moved, a sharp, irritated gesture as he adjusted his already pristine cuffs. The cat deals in half-truths and misdirection. His purpose is to create doubt, to muddy the waters. Alice looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw the elegant lines of his body, the perfect cut of his white suit, the almost painful control he exerted over every breath, every blink. He was a beautiful, frozen lake, and she was the stone threatening to shatter his surface. The tincture of sublime surrender still pulsed within her, making her aware of the warmth of her own skin, the dry catch in her throat, the heavy, sweet ache low in her belly. "Are they half-truths?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Is there a carnival?" He hesitated, a fatal tell. "There are many places in the Borderlands. Not all are conducive to your recovery." "My recovery?" A sharp laugh escaped her, tinged with the Hatter's madness and the cat's irony. "Is that what we're calling it? I thought I was here to feel. To be reborn. The Hatter's tea made me feel more in 5 minutes than I have in 5 years. The cat says there's a place where that feeling is amplified. And you want me to avoid it." She took a step towards him, into his personal space, close enough to see the faint, rapid pulse at the base of his throat. "Why? Because it's dangerous? Or because you can't control what happens to me there?" His silver eyes flashed, a crack in the ice. "You are playing with forces you do not understand." "Then explain them to me," she challenged, her gaze dropping to his lips. "Or are you only my guide on the paths you deem safe?" The air between them crackled. The magnetic pull she had felt at the tea ceremony returned tenfold, a physical force drawing her closer to him. She could smell his scent now, clean and cold like the air after a snowfall, with an undertone of something wild, something desperately restrained. "The carnival," he said, the words seeming to be torn from him, "is not a place of healing. It is a place of consumption. It offers sensation without meaning, contact without connection. It will use you up and spit you out, hollowed and craving more." "You speak as if you know," she whispered. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw not just a reluctant guardian, but a veteran of desires he had long since locked away. He was not just warning her, he was warning a part of himself. "The choice is yours," he finally said, echoing the cat's words but with a vastly different weight. "I will not force you. I will not restrain you. But if you choose the carnival, you walk there alone." It was the ultimate test. His control versus her surrender. His prescribed path of the heart versus the wild, unknown path of the body. The queen of unmade decisions felt the crown upon her head tilt, as the Hatter had suggested, towards the dangerous angle. She thought of the numbness, the grey rain, the silent apartment. She thought of the phantom of the sensible woman she had been, a ghost already fading. Then she thought of the Hatter's touch, the rabbit's charged proximity, the cat's tantalizing grin. She thought of the ache within her, a void that held to be filled not with thoughts, but with experiences. She stepped back from the rabbit. The space between them felt like a chasm. "Then I walk alone," she said. A profound stillness settled over him. He gave a single, curt nod, his face a mask of cold disappointment. And then, he was gone. Not walking away, but simply dissolving into the twilight, a wisp of white smoke swallowed by the glowing forest. Alone. The word echoed in the vastness. For a moment, panic, cold and sharp, clutched at her throat. But beneath the panic, something else bloomed, a terrifying, exhilarating sense of agency. As if her decision had been a key in a lock, the forest began to change. The phosphorescent light of the mushrooms intensified, the colors shifting from cool blues and greens to warm, pulsating ambers and deep crimsons. The air, once still, now carried a distant, rhythmic beat, a deep, primal drum that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of her feet. The scent changed too, the damp earth and cool mineral notes were overwhelmed by the smell of spiced wine, sugar-dusted pastries, and the unmistakable, musky perfume of a crowd in a state of high excitement. She followed the sound and the scent. The fossilized trees and mushrooms gave way to pavilions made of stretched silk and woven light, their colors shifting in time with the music. Figures moved in the shadows and under the garish lights, their forms sometimes human, sometimes something else entirely, a man with the graceful, antlered head of a stag, a woman whose skin shimmered with iridescent scales. Laughter, raw and unself-conscious, rang through the air. This was the carnival of flesh. She was swept into the current of it, the crowd a river of moving bodies. No one looked at her with surprise, she was just another reveler. A figure with a mask of gilded leaves pressed a warm, honeyed drink into her hand. She drank it, and it was like swallowing sunlight, a burst of golden warmth that spread through her limbs, making them loose and pliant. The drumbeat was inside her now, a second heartbeat. She let the crowd carry her to a vast, open space, a dance floor under a canopy of stars that pulsed in time with the music. Bodies moved against each other, a symphony of swaying hips and brushing shoulders, of hands on waists and whispered invitations in the dark. It was a celebration of the physical self, a worship of the temporary temple of the body. She saw a man across the crowd, his back to her. He wore a simple tunic of dark linen, and his hair was the color of wild honey. There was an ease to him, a lack of the rabbit's tension or the hatter's theatricality. He turned, and his eyes met hers. They were the color of a summer sky, clear and warm. He smiled, an open, genuine invitation, and held out his hand. This was not a metaphorical character from her psyche. This was just a man. A possibility. A moment. The queen of unmade decisions felt the weight of every path not taken. Here was one, offered to her in the beating heart of the carnival. It was not about love, or forever. It was about the simple, profound truth of one body recognizing another. It was about the surrender the hatter had offered and the rabbit had feared. She thought of the rabbit's warning, sensation without meaning. But as the man with the summer sky eyes smiled at her, his hand still outstretched, the sensation felt like meaning. The meaning of being alive, of being desired, of being present in a skin that was humming with life. She moved towards him. The crowd parted for her as if she were indeed a queen. She placed her hand in his. His grip was strong, his skin warm and slightly rough. He didn't speak. He simply drew her into the dance, into the rhythm of the drums and the pulse of the carnival. His body was a solid, warm presence against hers. His hand rested on the small of her back, a point of searing heat through the thin silk of her chemise. They moved together, not speaking, the language of their bodies enough. It was a conversation of pressure and release, of leading and following, of breaths mingling in the charged air. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, and his whisper was not of pretty words, but of pure sensation. "You feel like a secret I've been waiting to learn," he breathed. And in that moment, surrounded by the wild, transient beauty of the carnival, held by a stranger whose name she would never know, Alice understood. This wasn't about losing herself. It was about finding the parts of herself that could only be discovered in the reflection of another's desire. It was about reclaiming her body from the numbness, from the grief, from the tyranny of her own thoughts. She tilted her head back, offering her throat to the pulsing stars, and let the carnival, in all its glorious, consuming madness, wash over her. She was not being hollowed out. She was being filled. The carnival did not end, it faded. The drums softened to a memory in the blood, the garish lights dimmed to a dawn-like glow, and the press of warm bodies thinned, the revelers melting back into the shadows from whence they came. The man with the summer sky eyes had kissed her, a final, tender, and transient benediction on her brow before he, too, vanished with the night, leaving only the ghost of his warmth on her skin. Alice stood alone in the quieting clearing, the silken pavilions now looking like discarded petals. The tincture's fire had banked to a steady, glowing ember within her. She did not feel hollowed, as the rabbit had predicted. She felt cleansed. The frantic, grieving energy that had coiled inside her for months had been spent, danced out into the night air. In its place was a profound and solid calm. She had walked the path of the body. She had surrendered to sensation. And instead of being consumed, she had been remade. The queen of unmade decisions had made one. She had chosen to feel. A path of white marble, sleek and cold, appeared before her feet, a stark contrast to the soft, trampled earth of the carnival. It led away from the fading festivities, towards a range of mountains that glittered with a sharp, crystalline light. She knew, without being told, where it led. The palace of crystallized longing. The path of the heart. She walked, not with the frantic urgency the rabbit inspired, nor the wild abandon of the carnival, but with a new, steady purpose. The air grew colder, thinner. The landscape became one of breathtaking, severe beauty, ice sculptures that captured moments of exquisite emotion in frozen perfection, gardens where flowers made of spun glass tinkled in the wind. It was a world of order, of forever, just as the cat had said. And it was achingly beautiful, and utterly silent. The palace itself was a marvel, a structure carved from a single, massive diamond, its facets catching the pale light and fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows. It was immense, flawless, and sterile. He was waiting for her at the great, arched entrance, which was not a door but a shimmering curtain of frozen mist. The rabbit. He stood as still as the palace itself, his white suit a part of the crystalline architecture. His silver eyes were no longer just anxious. They were haunted. "You came," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual resonant urgency. "You said the choice was mine," Alice replied, stopping a few feet from him. The cold radiating from the palace was a physical force. "I chose both." He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that took in her calm posture, her clear eyes, the faint, lingering warmth in her cheeks from the carnival. He saw that she was unharmed. He saw that she was, in fact, more than she had been. I felt it, he whispered, the confession torn from him. While you were there. In the carnival. I felt every beat of the drum as if it were my own heart stuttering. I felt the heat of a stranger's hand on your skin as if it were a brand on mine. He took a step towards her, his composure finally, truly, shattered. I told myself I was guiding you, protecting you. But I was protecting myself. I was afraid that if you tasted that kind of freedom, you would see the chains I wear. You would see that I am not a guide, but another prisoner of this place. The truth, laid bare in the frozen air. Alice looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as a symbolic figure, but as a being, trapped by his own nature, his own role. The keeper of time, forever watching it pass, forever separate. This palace, she said, gesturing to the perfect, frozen beauty around them. This is your longing, isn't it? Not mine. The desire for things to be perfect, and still, and forever unchanged. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound defeat. It is a tomb for desires that are too precious to be risked in the messy, unpredictable world. Alice walked past him, through the curtain of mist. It was cold, but it did not chill her. Inside, the palace was one great hall, its walls and floor and ceiling all made of seamless, clear crystal. And frozen within the walls, like insects in amber, were moments. Beautiful, heartbreaking moments. A first kiss, forever a breath away from completion. A declaration of love, forever hovering on parted lips. A reunion, forever framed in an eternal, almost touch. It was the museum of almost. The prison of potential. She turned to face him as he followed her in. You told me the carnival offered sensation without meaning. But this is meaning without sensation. It's a beautiful idea, but it has no heartbeat. It has no warmth. It is safe, he argued, but his voice was weak. I don't want to be safe, Alice said, her voice echoing softly in the vast, crystalline space. I want to be alive. I fell through the mirror because I was already in a tomb. A very comfortable, very sensible tomb. I will not trade one for another. She walked up to him until they were toe to toe. She reached up, and with fingers that were steady and sure, she began to unbutton his pristine white waistcoat. He stood frozen, his breath catching, his silver eyes wide with shock. What are you doing? He breathed. I am unmasking the guide, she said softly, slipping the waistcoat from his shoulders. Then, she took the edges of his white kid gloves and slowly, deliberately, pulled them off, one by one. His hands were bare. They were strong, elegant, and they trembled slightly. The sight of his vulnerable, naked skin was more intimate than any kiss she had shared in the carnival. The rabbit is a role you play, she said, letting the gloves fall to the crystal floor. The keeper of time is a duty you hide behind. Who are you underneath? What do you want? Not for me. Not for my journey. For you. He stared at his own bare hands as if seeing them for the first time. When he looked up at her, the last of his defenses had crumbled. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying hope. I want, he whispered, his voice cracking, to stop being a spectator in my own life. I want to feel the time I am so obsessed with measuring. He lifted a hand, hesitated, and then cupped her cheek. His skin was not cool, as she had imagined. It was warm. Alive. The touch was a jolt, but it was not the chaotic energy of the Hatter or the simple warmth of the stranger. It was a current of profound recognition. It was a key finding its lock. "Then feel this," Alice said, and she stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, nor one of gentle exploration. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was the surrender the Hatter had offered and the connection the rabbit had feared, fused into one perfect, timeless moment. The frozen palace around them seemed to groan, and a web of fine cracks appeared in the crystal walls. The crystallized longings trapped within began to soften, to blur, their perfect preservation broken by the living, breathing reality of the now. He kissed her back, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close against the solid, real warmth of his body. The watch in his pocket ticked once, loudly, and then fell silent forever. When they finally parted, the palace of crystallized longing was no longer a sterile monument. It was thawing, dripping with the music of melting ice, the rainbows and its facets dancing with wild, renewed life. The garden of whispering petals was pushing through the marble floor, and in the distance, the faint, joyful beat of the carnival's drum could be heard. The rabbit, no, he, the man whose name she still did not know but whose heart she could now feel beating against her own, looked at her with wonder. "The Borderlands," he said. "They are changing. Because of you." Alice smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. She took his bare hand in hers. "No," she said. "Because of us." She had walked both paths. She had embraced the body and now, she had unlocked the heart. The queen of unmade decisions was queen no more. She was simply Alice. Whole. Transformed. And ready, at last, to begin. And so, Alice emerged from the Borderlands, not through a mirror, but through the very fabric of her own being. Transformed. Whole. Her journey through the landscapes of desire is over, but yours, dear listener, is perhaps just beginning. What whispers from your own wonderland are you only now beginning to hear? What unmade decisions crown your thoughts? The Borderlands are vast, and every heart holds a map. If this journey into the depths of sensuality and self has stirred something within you, we invite you to become a part of our story. Subscribe to the channel, so you do not miss the next descent into a world of poetic fantasy and psychological depth. Let us know what you discovered in the velvet shadows. Leave a comment below, tell us which character resonated most deeply with a part of your own soul. Was it the controlled urgency of the rabbit? The chaotic liberation of the Hatter? The ambiguous wisdom of the cat? And if you wish to help other listeners find their way to this strange and beautiful shore, please like this audiobook and share it with those you think are ready for the journey. Your engagement is the magic that allows us to continue crafting these worlds for you. Thank you for listening. Remember, the most important adventures always begin with a single, curious step.